Hello. I would like to learn people's names and maybe have a bit of introduction if you want to say something about what you're looking for in the class. Would anyone like to start?
Hi, I'm Anirudh. Okay, and I like to understand how sacred spaces are created. So I thought that was a very interesting topic when I think of places where we can rejuvenate ourselves mentally, connect with where we feel a connect with a higher power, etc. So I thought that would be something I'd want to know more about.
Okay, good. Thank you. That will happen, I think.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Amisa. And I don't really have any such expectation of the class or anything. I'm just curious.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm Merika, and I also would, since I'm now living and volunteering here in Adyar, and this is such a special place, I would like to know how to take care of it and how to understand this place better, because I feel that this is a very special opportunity, and
Okay.
give my best.
Thank you.
I'm Lakshmikantan. I don't have any expectations of the class as such, but I would like to understand how a sacred space can be created, and if it can be created in the space that we are living in, like in our homes, something like that.
On our last day, we'll definitely be doing that.
I am Krista, and I don't have any specific expectations, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you are going to tell us.
Thank you.
I'm Ria. I'm here because I like an experience of having a youth gathering in Adyar. So I like that experience, and I come here to hang out with all the people here.
Okay. Maybe there are some young nature spirits on the property too.
I'm Shiva. So I have no expectation. I came here open-mindedly. Let's see where it takes.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicoletta. I don't have any particular expectation. Anyway, I'd like to improve the capacity to recognize and manage sacred space.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Abhinav. I do research on rituals for healing. I would like to see if this could also help me work on my research better.
Thank you. Make sure you ask me questions, because I would be very interested in answering those questions, and I think the group would benefit.
Please now speak a little bit louder because microphone is here.
Yes. Sure. I don't have any particular expectation. I'm just curious about learning about sacred.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Nate here. So no expectations as such, but here to learn.
Okay, good, thank you.
No expectation, just to learn.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Aditya. No expectations as such, but I like to learn whatever.
Hi, I am Prachi, and same. I didn't have any prior expectations for the class. I'm eager to learn.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Leo.
Hello, Leo.
Hi, I'm Francis. I think we met last year, and
yes.
I don't really have much expectations, but I would like to learn about sacred spaces, especially about maintaining them. Thank you.
Can you finish success?
Hi, I'm Manvi. I just expect to be able to find my own space here and be able to share. And when it comes to sacred spaces, I'm looking to find a place where I feel safe within myself.
Visible.
Okay, that's good.
Hey, I'm Mike. I have no expectations because I don't actually know anything about sacred spaces, so everything's free.
Okay, good.
Hi, I'm Vignesh. Well, I think there are many places on this campus that have a certain energy. I'm not really, I can't say I recognize it very well, but there are spaces where you do feel a certain sense of presence or something. So I would like to come away from this with a certain ability to recognize these spaces and probably, care for them as you said. That would be probably expected.
So Vignesh, you were the one along with Sarah who worked on bringing me into this program. And I know that she said there was a project that you were working on having to do with
Ecology.
Yes, ecology. So make sure that you bring your questions about that project into the meetings, and also get other people in the group interested too, because it could be a good boost for that.
Hi, my name is Navi. So I'm just started doing the research on the child psychology since I am in school. So I want to know the people mind and how it will be helpful for me to learn more.
What exactly was the field?
Child psychology.
Child psychology.
Child psychology. Okay, good. Thank you.
A little bit louder because microphone here.
Hi, this is Kostov. So I attended the youth gathering earlier this year in Bhavani, which was a great experience. So I'm here to learn more, eager to hear from you.
Okay, thank you.
I am Jammu Ravi. As such, I don't have any expectations. I'm trying to learn something more. Hi, my name is Bharat Bhushan. I work in Philips. So in the movie field, we work in chaos with different departments. So I am curious to know sacred places and learn about it.
Which department is it?
I work in direction department.
Okay, good. Yes, any questions you have? It's a little difficult since I'm here and have never been to Adyar for me to speak specifically about places that are on the landscape there. But Marika has given me some wonderful photographs as a starting point, and maybe we can continue to build some knowledge about the area from that. Thank you.
Hello. I would love to learn more about sacred spaces because I have been enjoying being in a lot of sacred places, building religious buildings, and I want to know how I can contribute now.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Sviatoslav. I'm looking forward to get any insights into how nature works in general and keep an open mind and no specific expectations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, nice to meet you. I am Jimena, and I would love to understand nature more and to know if it is possible, how can as human beings we can help to make the spaces sacred, like to recognize them, but how can we find the power in us to put the sacred everywhere in this world? Something like this. And I
think that's a good plan.
and mostly to learn with an open mind. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Clover, and I would like to know what kinds of spaces are sacred and how to identify them, as well as whether we can make any space sacred.
Yes, that will certainly be a focus of the program.
I'm Smita Pragya. I don't have any expectations, but
I want to learn and I'm curious and excited.
Okay, thank you. The great danger of telling a presenter that you have no expectations is that it's then very easy to exceed all expectations. So I will try my best to actually provide something of substance. So first of all, I want to check and make sure, excuse me, I came back from Europe with a cough that still hasn't quite left me. I would like to understand something about the schedule. Would you like to take a break during these 2 hours? Is that expected?
No, we have a tea break after, but if you like, we can do like a 5 minute break and then we can continue. But it's like if it's bigger group, it's I don't know easier to just continue. But
That's fine with me. I just wanted to make sure that I understood how the plan would work. So I understand that I'll be talking to you in your morning. It's my evening, but I'll be talking to you in your morning, giving you some theoretical background for sacred spaces and working with them. And it has been suggested that I also give you some things to think about or meditate on as you go about your day on the Adyar campus, and that we'll come together again in the evening, your time, and share the experiences that you have and the questions. So I think this is a good plan. And has someone else joined us?
you can come and tell your name and what you expect for this lecture.
Just a
In front,
Yeah.
in front, you see me.
Yeah,
Yes, please.
Careful. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. I'm Chaitra from India, Bangalore, and this is my son, Advait. So today I'm here to listen to your lecture. Actually, I wanted to see you directly, but it's okay with the Zoom. So the thing is, first thing, why I came here, or do you want to know like why I came for the lecture?
Either one is fine.
Yeah. So actually, there are many questions in me. I always get answers. So some more questions are inside. So I'm looking for that answer. And also when I meet you, I wanted to see you. So clairvoyant, I haven't met any real clairvoyants. So that was my curiosity.
Okay. So as long as the questions that you ask, I invite all questions, but as long as they are related to the topic that we're talking about and also can be a benefit to the whole group, then I think ask anything that you would like to ask.
Can I ask now? Or later?
Not yet.
Okay.
We're still doing our introductions. Who else has joined us?
This one more big person.
Hello, hi.
Yes, hello.
And my expectation is, I just want to know about what is cosmic science.
Okay, good. All right, so this is a big subject, and I think the best way to talk about it is for us to all make the assumption that there are not just visible beings, but also invisible beings, that there are not just physical beings, but also non-physical beings, and that in order to understand sacred spaces, we need to realize that we're also learning something about invisible or non-physical or non-human types of beings. In the Theosophical tradition, they have borrowed a Sanskrit word, deva, to talk about these non-physical, invisible, non-human beings. The word actually means shining ones, and it's generally used with reference to the gods or goddesses. However, there can also be small gods and goddesses as well as great ones. And so the Theosophical tradition speaks of a deva evolution. So we know about our human evolution, not just in physical terms throughout the history of the world, but also in theosophical terms, we know about human evolution as a way of self-transformation and self-development. And we understand that there may be less evolved, equally evolved, and more evolved people than we are. The same thing is true of the Deva evolution. There are many levels, starting with relatively simple ones and moving up to very great beings. And these levels are sometimes described in terms of elementals or elemental beings. These are the ones who are the most basic. And then nature spirits, which are a little more evolved. And at that point, a little farther beyond them would be elves and fairies, as we know from Western mythologies and folklore. And then there are individualized devas. Up until the elves and the fairies, devas have a group mind, something like you would imagine an ant heap or a beehive has. So this group mind eventually gives way to an individualized consciousness. And then you have beings that correlate with the different planes of nature that are described in theosophical teaching. So the physical plane is obviously the one where you are experiencing in the present moment. But there is also beyond that an astral plane, which is invisible to most people, but which we glimpse sometimes at night in our dreams. And there are also things that happen on the astral plane for people who have died from the physical plane. They continue to live, but they have a new kind of experience, a new kind of development on the astral level. There are also astral devas. They're sometimes called desire devas because the astral plane is also known as the emotional plane or the desire plane. These are the devas who are involved in our wishes. So if we have a wish or desire to do something or become something, often a deva can be helpful in inspiring us in how to do that. And such a deva would come from this astral or desire level. Then there's a higher plane beyond the astral, and that plane is the mental plane. That plane also involves people who have passed on and many workers, you could say, who are not physical, who are human but not physical, who are involved in helping the people who've passed on. And then there are devas of that level. They tend to be much more powerful and also much more broad in what they do. So, for example, you can have devas of culture that come from that level. The ones that are involved, for example, in great cultural movements or any kind of spiritual organization. So it goes upward, even beyond that. There's a Buddhic plane or level of being that has its own devas. Same with the nirvanic and monadic levels, all the way up to the divine level, which is God consciousness. And my understanding is that my understanding is that the Deva evolution and the human evolution run parallel to each other. And there are ways that they interact and even to some degree collaborate. But eventually, at the monadic level, it seems that they merge so that the divine consciousness is, in effect, a complete union of everything we know and have experienced and all of our special skills as human beings, and all of those things that also have developed parallel to us in the Deva realm. This is something I may speak about in more detail later when we've got some more basics. So, in a sense, the angels that are talked about in Christian, Judaic, and Muslim traditions are also high devas in the theosophical idea of deva evolution. And many people think of the word deva, many theosophists, I should say, think of the word deva and the word angel as essentially being the same. And just as there are in those traditions, the Western traditions I just mentioned, just as there are angels, there are also higher angels called archangels. And some of you may be familiar with those. They're often involved in prayers and certain kinds of magic. And the liberal Catholic Church uses a lot of the angelic realms. So from the theosophical perspective, the Deva evolution pretty much entails all of the spiritual beings of all of the world's religions and folklores. And one thing that you need to be aware of is the name may be different from one culture to another, but the function may be essentially the same. And that's one of the ways you can start to understand this hierarchy of devas that goes from the very basic elemental all the way up to the highest archangel. So I'll be making periodically different kinds of references to the hierarchy and evolution and the place of different beings in that evolution. Hopefully, by the time our class is over, you'll have some idea where the different beings fit and what they do. And you might even, on the Adyar landscape, be able to differentiate between beings of one kind and beings of another. And also their levels with respect to how developed they are. I have to say that this is not an ability, being a seer of devas was not an ability that I was born with. It's something that I've developed over many years and I'm still learning about. And so all of your questions are good. I can answer them either from what I know from theosophical reading or what I know from personal experience. So the idea of a Deva evolution or Deva hierarchy with different levels that correspond to the planes of nature. That's the first thing that I want all of you to understand. Any questions about this before we move on to another idea? Okay, well, here's one.
How does their evolution work? Is it like in their single birth they evolve, or they just die and move to the next evolutionary stage?
This is not an easy question to answer. It's not because I don't have ideas about it. It's because the ideas don't easily come into words. Or if I try to explain it, it's possible that the conception that you get from the words may not be exactly what is meant. So what I understand is between the lowest levels and the highest levels of the Deva evolution, there are what I'll call bands, evolutionary bands that correspond to the planes of nature. So for example, the band that corresponds to the mental plane of nature is a band of Deva consciousness. And in a sense, for us to have what we call a mind, a portion of that Deva consciousness is sectioned off from the rest of it. And our human consciousness is, for the sake of a particular lifetime, blended with a being of the mental realm, a mental elemental to be precise. And that matter, so-called, of the mental plane that is holding the mind for us, we evolve our minds within that, and the being who is the body of Deva consciousness that holds that mind also evolves. So right from the beginning, it's important to understand that the Devas have various functions, and one of them is to support our individual lives and growth. So we have a physical elemental, and that physical elemental is supporting the development of the physical body and its health and well-being throughout our lives. There's also an astral emotional elemental, and that being corresponds to our heart and our emotional life. There's a mental elemental corresponding to the mind, as I was just explaining. And I've come to the conclusion that there is also a soul elemental or causal elemental. This is not something I've seen in theosophical literature, but it's something that I've experienced. This causal elemental comes from the highest levels of the mental plane, and essentially it's the elemental that holds the consciousness of our soul. So already you can understand the difficulty of answering the question that you ask, because we're talking about a structure of what it means to be a being that is very different from the way that we think about ourselves. So if you can imagine that any of these bands, an astral band, a mental band, is made up of slots that represent functions. And every one of these functions is a manifestation of the divine or God consciousness. And each of those functions has its own identity within the stream or the band, because it does not have precisely the same function as any other being. Then you understand something about how individuality works in the mental level of being. So there can be an incomprehensibly large number of these beings, all of which are in one way or another manifestations of God consciousness for the work of creating and sustaining our worlds, not just the physical world, but the other planes as well. So in the structure of God consciousness, every one of those slots is absolutely fixed. But the being that is evolving back to God consciousness along the Deva evolution moves on a path where it takes up one of these slots, and then when it grows out of that slot, grows into the next more developed slot of the same kind. And this continues all the way up until there's the larger merging that comes in God consciousness. And at that level, again, difficult to talk about, every component of God consciousness is completely aware of its function as an individual, and also the whole of the divine plan of which it has this one part to serve. So those highest beings, the archangels, let's say, or the highest devas, have many cells in their bodies. And the cells are all of these functions I was talking about. And all the functions are distributed level by level, ever expanding down until you get to the physical plane. Eventually, they come to oneness in this larger being. So evolution for a Deva consciousness is not about having a body and the body dies and the Deva moves on. It's having a function, and then the form that allows that function to be fulfilled is outgrown, and you move to the next higher form. Probably, because this is the case in most transitions of consciousness and that we're familiar with, there's a period of sleep, or in Theosophy, it's called pralaya, for the being, that would be the opportunity to integrate what it learned through the cycle just finished, as a preparation for opening up to what it needs to learn and the functions it needs to fulfill at the next higher level. So that was an advanced question, obviously, but it gives you at least some idea of the size of the field that we're working with, and also the kinds of questions that can be asked within that field. So I'm grateful for that. Does anyone have a question about my answer to that question? Okay, let's set that aside for the time being. I'll keep coming back to the idea of devas being cells, or having a function or a slot. And the reason why it was important to talk about this in some way right at the beginning is because of people's perceptual abilities. So I think there are three general ways that people can have what I'll call inner sense experiences. Inner sense is any form of intuition or psychic ability or perception of non-physical beings or non-human beings. You can perceive them in terms of energy, you can perceive them in terms of consciousness, or you can perceive them in terms of an image or a form. And I believe that each of us specializes in one of these. It helps if you develop the other two, but we usually, each of us, have a particular gift. So I call myself a seer because my gift is the gift of seeing images. But there are other people who will sense devas differently than I do. I can see them as beings. Most people, no, I shouldn't say that, other people, especially people who perceive in terms of energy, will pick them up as the energy of a place or the mood of a place. It's important to understand that whatever you perceive is valuable and valid, and not to make any assumptions about whether someone else is perceiving something that you don't and can't, and that's a deficiency, or someone else is perceiving something that can't be true because you don't perceive it that way. So as we go forward in our class, I'm hoping that you'll spend some time looking around you on the Adyar campus, gathering information in whatever way it shows up for you. And then when we come back to have our evening talks, you'll feel open and free about sharing what you've experienced. So that essentially what we're doing is we're creating a group body of knowledge, a community database of sorts, of possibilities for understanding what the Deva world at Adyar is involved with. So the third way is as beings. So there's, in a sense, there's a difference between perceiving a visual image and perceiving as a being. And the difference is one of relationship. So it's also possible to perceive that there is a deva in need or a nature spirit in need in exactly the same way that you might perceive that there's an animal in need. The only difference being that the animal in need is probably a visible being in front of you, and the deva in need or the nature spirit in need would be an invisible being that may also be in front of you. You may not necessarily perceive the image, but you may perceive the need. So keep in mind as we move through the class that you may be more specialized according to energy, and that means that you'll perceive along the lines that I was just describing a moment ago, the feeling of a place, not necessarily the need of the place, but the feeling of a place. So for example, if you go into a place and it feels peaceful, or it feels uplifting, or joyful, probably you're on the energy spectrum. If you go to a place and you feel the presence of an angel, but you can't see it, you may be on the consciousness spectrum. And if you see a being, you may be on the information spectrum. So the way to think about it is, just a moment, I want to make sure I say this correctly. In a sense, those who perceive energy are involved with the powers and the laws of the universe. And every great deva is actually a conscious being embodying the function of a particular physical law. So if you're experiencing a powerful thunderstorm, that storm is a great deva who is representing the powers and the laws of thunderstorms according to the climate that you're in and the weather conditions. Sometimes you can perceive a being like that as a being. Sometimes you'll feel the energy of it. Sometimes there will be a sense of a presence, but without an image. In the Native American tradition, such a deva would be called a thunderbird and is thought of as being a great eagle-like being where the wings flapping create the wind and the eyes opening and closing create the flashes of lightning. So with these three different ways of perception, you might want to be thinking about what it is that you are picking up and listening to other people's stories or explanations about experience with interest, because that might be a different way of perceiving than yours. It might be something you could do yourself. It might be something you never even noticed you could do. So we're talking about clairvoyance. And I think it's important for me to say that in safety, the development of any of these inner senses should always be a process of natural and organic unfolding, and not a process of pursuing and trying and forcing and working to achieve. It's dangerous because there are beings who, usually non-physical human beings, who can tempt you into trying to get powers that are not safe or helpful or healthy. So as far as powers are concerned, it's important to make sure that you are thinking always about the support that the powers that you have give to others. Never think about the power that it gives over others, including the power to impress other people. So powers and laws for those who experience energy. And then for those who experience consciousness, it's beings and needs in the sense of relationship. And then for seers like me, it's information about the nature of the being. It's perceiving an image of the being. So any questions about these three different kinds of perception?
If you have one, I mean, if you see, you will probably also perceive something more. It's like you don't have like this only one. I mean, they are like interconnected. I mean, if you see a being, you already also have like a sense that what it feels, like the other the aspects.
It depends. Not everybody in the room might have that experience, but in my understanding, the ideal is to have all three of these ways of perceiving inner sensibilities, of perceiving inner sense information, because each one of them is a check and a balance on the other one. So for example, if you only see powers and laws and you never see beings and needs, there's a desire to harness those powers, which essentially is a form of enslaving the being that's behind the powers. And that's the basis of so-called dark magic. On the other hand, if you only perceive beings and needs, you might feel overwhelmed because you sense the need, but you don't exactly sense the energy of what needs to happen to fulfill that need. And likewise, if you are a seer, you can see a being and accept the form that you're seeing as being exactly what it is, when it could be something else. And that was just the easiest way for your mind to make the perception. So yes, the important thing is to learn about all three, because probably you start with one. You may have two developed already, and the third one will also often come along at some point. So for example, for me, as a seer, it was easy to see that I was a seer when I looked back on my life, because I had an extremely active dream life. So the imagery was constantly present, even from when I was very young, extremely vivid, very memorable, easy for me to remember years and years later. And it just so happens that I started experiencing astral projection, the ability to leave the body and travel in non-physical worlds, when I was a teenager. And that seems to go along with being a seer. It was very scary because I didn't know where I was going or what I was doing. I couldn't perceive any beings. I went from there to developing a kind of empathy with other beings that helped me understand beings and needs. And then at some point along, this would have been in college, at some point around that time, I may also have developed the energy capacity, but it didn't happen immediately. Sometimes I think seer came first, and then the energy, and then the beings. But it almost doesn't matter how it comes or when they do. The ideal is everything that I experience is linked to seeing in some way. The other two are there to support the seeing. And I think that would be equally true if you had energy first. The other two could be there to support that experience. And same with consciousness. Any other questions about this?
So you were talking about sensing presence from the consciousness point of view, and you're talking about when the people detect energy in a sacred space as well. Okay, so when you're sensing the consciousness, is that different from? Is it like people might feel it as an energy within that they connect with? Okay, that they connect with that certain spaces, or how do you? I mean, how do we experience consciousness differently vis-a-vis energy? Is the inner experience different? And one more part is, do we get thoughts? Do we communicate with these things through thought, intentionally or unintentionally?
You know, I think the best way to answer your question is actually to move on to the next thing that I wanted to talk about. And so hold your question. And if I've left anything out after I've talked about it, then bring back the pieces I left out. How's that? Okay. For this purpose, I think I'm actually going to share my screen and show you a few PowerPoint slides. Okay, great. Thank you. So here's the slide I just read out to you about the what are sacred places. So let's talk about the functions of sacred places. They're essentially conduits of energy, portals of entry, and networks of communication between realms. It's easiest probably to think about this as going between physical reality and non-physical reality, with the understanding that non-physical reality may come in several descriptions based on what plane of nature we're dealing with. As conduits of energy, sacred places enable energy flow between physical and non-physical realms of being. This can happen in the form of a blessing. For example, when the energy moves from non-physical to physical. It can happen also in the form of gratitude when it moves from the physical to the non-physical. So in all of your dealings with the Deva evolution, the key to opening up a connection to the Devas is being in gratitude for their presence, for the work that they're doing, for the peace that they provide, or the love, or the sense of spiritual support, protection, any of the things that go along with the feeling of being in a sacred space. As portals of entry, sacred places enable the passage of conscious beings between physical and non-physical realms. I've been learning about this just this year. I'm going to tell a story, but I have no idea what effect it will have on you because it's so improbable. I'm still kind of getting used to it myself. In my city of Boston, not very far from where I live, there's a small park that contains some European beech trees. And these beech trees are 180 years old. So they're probably among the oldest beings in the city. So I like to go there because there's such a wonderful atmosphere being with these trees. So I was there with a friend over the summer. We brought a little lunch with us and we're eating it, sitting on the roots of one of these enormous trees. And not far away from us was the central trunk of the tree. This beech tree was a little like your banyan tree in Adyar, only it had fewer trunks, but there were multiple trunks that were coming up from branches that had dropped down and turned into roots. So in the central trunk, all of a sudden, as if there were like an elevator rising up, there came into view this being who I will call a gnome, an earth being. And I looked at it and it looked at me, and we were both a little surprised, except I think it wanted to see if I could see it. And obviously I could. And then it did a little dance, a funny sort of set of steps with his feet, and then a bow, almost like a greeting. And I wasn't quite sure what that was about. And then it told me, so I actually was able to communicate with me. It told me that it had been sent to me by the king or lord of the earth element, because it wanted to tell me something about the special soil of this area where the 180-year-old tree was growing. I'd recently been in an area in the northwestern part of the United States where there were many old trees and what's called old growth forest, also an intact ecosystem. And because this area where the trees were growing had not been disturbed in 180 years, this relationship between the tree and the soil had developed so that, you know, the tree would benefit and the soil would benefit, and back and forth it would go, almost like its own special ecosystem. And the gnome inside the tree just wanted to tell me that. And after it told me that, it turned its back on me and went down the elevator and disappeared. So again, I'm still trying to figure stuff like this out because it's fairly new, but that would be an example of a passage of conscious beings between physical and non-physical realms, where a sacred place, in this case, this very ancient tree, was a conduit or a portal of entry. Sometimes these beings can show up as apparitions, which is the movement of non-physical to physical. That's pretty much what I just described. Sometimes it can happen in the form of astral projection, which would mean my leaving my body and going someplace else, another level of being, but that didn't happen here. And then the third thing is they can act as networks of communication, enabling the transfer of messages between physical and non-physical beings. That also happened for me with this tree. So this can happen physical to non-physical. So in other words, we as human beings can offer a kind of worship or gratitude or prayer or make an offering to the guardian of any sacred space. And it can also happen from non-physical to physical in the form of guidance or protection or some form of influence. A lot of nature spirit religions are based on this idea of sacred places as networks of communication, often with trees as the mediator. So let's talk a little bit about types of sacred places. Some are already existing in the landscape. They could be called power points. I sometimes think of them as places where the energetic grid on which the illusion of physical reality is hung are present to us if you're able to perceive them. Again, I'm always exploring, always trying to understand these can also show up as beings, in which case they show up as larger angels. And if any of you have a chance to look into a book called Kingdom of the Gods by Jeffrey Hodson, who was a clairvoyant working within the Theosophical Society in the 20th century. He has paintings that were made based on his verbal descriptions of some of these great devas, for example, devas of mountain ranges. And often the head of the deva is more of a point of power than it is an actual face. So I think it's possible that some of the points of power I've seen, I was seeing a deva but not able to see the body of it. Sacred places can also develop organically through ecosystems in the way I was just describing. They can be collaboratively developed, and this is the basis of sacred objects or places of worship. In other words, there's a call, so to speak, that goes back and forth between the non-physical level and the physical level, and humans are on one side and devas are on the other side, and they meet to create the sacred place. The humans create it by architectural means often, and the devas create it by ensouling or embodying themselves in the things that are made by the humans. But all sacred spaces have one thing in common, and that is the presence of these non-physical beings called devas, or shining ones. I've already explained this, I'll just go through it with a slide. The evolutionary hierarchy that runs parallel to human development, from lowly elementals through nature spirits and fairies to ever higher angels and archangels. So I think of devas, this refers back to another answer I gave earlier. I think of devas as the thoughts of God manifested as conscious beings. So if you follow the deva evolution all the way to its highest point, it's God or source. But God manifested for the purpose of bringing specific laws and powers into play in the world. Their purpose is to embody and enforce the laws of the universe. Not only the physical and scientific laws, such as gravity or thermodynamics, but also spiritual and moral laws. So karma is something that the deva hierarchy is involved with very deeply. I think of devas as the force of synthesis, bringing things together. They help to create and maintain links between physical and non-physical reality. And also they help to unite every conscious being and level of existence into ever larger wholes. You can see this with soil, bacteria, plants, and animals combining into an ecosystem. And there could be something called a landscape deva that would be in charge of that ecosystem. But it can also involve uniting individual humans into humanity as planetary stewards. In other words, there can be a collaboration between devas and nature spirits and devas, nature spirits and humans in order to make the world a better place for all beings. So here's the slide I especially wanted to get to answer the question that was asked before I started screen sharing. What are the components of sacred places? Usually there's a point of power, and when you find that point of power and you stand in it, there's a feeling that you're standing at the center of the universe. And it can even be such that when you look around you, it almost seems like everything that you look at and everything within your range of vision somehow emanates from that point of power. There's usually a spiritual guardian of the sacred place who would be a deva or an angel. There are boundaries of some kind, and these involve sacred geometry to help the power accumulate or sometimes to help it be distributed. And these are often created by humans. And then there may be various ways of amplifying that power and our sensitivity to it, and perhaps even spreading it around. And these can involve light, color, sound, and incense. So for example, Marika sent me a photograph of a temple where chanting is constantly going on, and people can hear it from around the compound. So that would be an instance of the amplification of the power of a sacred space through sound. There's often at least one in a larger sacred space like the Adyar compound. There's usually at least one map of the universe. It could be a map of stars or a map of the levels of being, of the levels of planes. I'm not sure where that would be in Adyar, but it's possible that there are representations of the planes here and there that may be somewhat hidden. But it's also possible to say that, to a certain extent, the Theosophical Society symbol itself is a map of the universe. We can talk about that in more detail later. And then there is also often a map of the spiritual journey of the human soul. A typical one of these would be a labyrinth. Now, these can be more subtle. They can be so built into the landscape that you wouldn't notice them. So for example, in the photographs that Marika sent me, there were temples, many temples or gardens, but none of the great gateways, the great stone gateways. It's possible that the way those gateways guide people to and from various parts of the campus are a representation of the spiritual journey of the human soul mapped onto the campus. And whether that was done intentionally and has been forgotten, or whether it was done intuitively and has yet to be revealed, maybe we can find out in the course of our time together. And often there will be a human guardian and spokesperson, a priest or a shaman. So for the liberal Catholic Church, for example, the caretaker of the church, the priest or bishop who celebrates there, would be the human guardian and spokesperson for the angels that the church is dedicated to, and who are built into the very structure of the church building itself. That's something we can talk about later too. So the part about perceiving sacred places, I'm not going to say anything about, because it's essentially the same thing I was talking about with the three different types. So that's the end of the PowerPoint that I'll do for today. So how much of that long, interesting question got answered by what I just shared?
Most of it, you're just saying about communicating with them through thought, or how do we communicate with them in a sacred space? And how do we sense their presence, if you will? Is it like an energy presence, or what does it mean to feel their presence?
What does it mean to feel the presence? Okay, so I think the best thing we can do is I can give you some work to do in the course of the day. And then when we come back together tonight, we can talk about it. But I also want to focus tonight on some of the photographs that Marika took and sent me this morning of different sacred places, because there are many, many things that I was able to notice just from looking at the photograph. So think about that slide that I showed you a moment ago. Actually, I should probably call it up again in just a moment. And make notes of these components, because the homework assignment, so to speak, is going to be based on that. Okay, so these are the things. What I want you to do is wander around the landscape, do it with friends, do it alone, do it in a moment of free time, do it when you're walking from one area to another. And the first thing is to notice is a point of power. I wouldn't say the first thing. Any of these things will be equally valid. But one of the ways to tell that a power point is nearby is by noticing the direction of your thoughts. Now, most of us are so involved in our own thoughts, we think of our thoughts as having their origin in our head. But if you are at all sensitive to energy, you may actually be able to feel sometimes that your consciousness is pulled in a certain direction, or that your thought comes from a certain direction. I won't say any more than that because you'll recognize it if you've ever had the experience, or if you're open to it, you might notice it if you've never noticed it before. If you want to see if you can feel a point of power in the sense that I was talking about, to stand, to follow that sense of where your thought is coming from or where you're drawn to until you can actually stand in that field or beneath it if it's above you in some way. You might have the experience of the center of the universe. I'll talk more about that tomorrow because that's a skill I can give you more support in developing. So if the place is full of some emotion that you weren't feeling before you got there, for example, a sense of peace or quieting, or a feeling of the sacred or of awe, or of happiness or of joy, or of even being in the right place, knowing that you're really in the right place, which could be in your life, it could be in Adyar, but it could be where you are in the campus of Adyar at that time. All of those things can be the indication of a presence of a spiritual guardian. That energy is what that guardian brings to the sacred place. So if you walk into a temple and it doesn't seem any different than a department store, maybe that doesn't work for you. But if you walk into a temple and you get quiet and it feels like there's a sense of awe there, you may not go any farther than that. You may not get a sense of presence, but you may actually be able to know that you're in touch with the spiritual guardian just by feeling its aura or its ambience. The next thing to look for is the boundaries. So again, with several of the pictures that were shown to me, obviously a temple is a boundary because it contains a space, but there may be structures on the outside of the temple that are also part of it, such as steps or a patio or a mosaic. And those may extend to some distance outside that sacred space, that temple. And in some cases, there may be a great attention to everything being symmetrical, almost like the manifestation of a mandala in three-dimensional terms instead of two-dimensional terms. Those are maps of the universe, whether it's a map of the inner universe or a map of the outer universe. It depends on the nature of the mandala or the geometrical structure. So make some observations about that. Chances are you're already in the field of the deva. You're already feeling it to some extent. The boundaries are helping contain it in some way. Maybe the boundaries extend farther beyond those spaces. So what happens if you start walking away from the temple? When do you stop feeling the peace? You may realize at a certain point it just stops. It isn't there anymore. And you can play back and forth by going across that boundary. And it may be in different places for different people, but sometimes I've had the experience of people recognizing those boundaries and perceiving them where I perceive them without my giving them any cue. See if there are places where light, color, sound, or incense all have a special effect. I imagine, for example, under the banyan tree, the lights and the colors are really special, and that is part of what creates the sacredness and attunes you to the being that has created that very large structure for itself as a home. We've already talked about maps of the universe to look for, and maps of the spiritual journey of the human soul. And notice who are the caretakers. Some of them may only be grounds people, but some of them may have more of a priestly or a shamanic function. If it's possible, if they're interested in speaking with you, find out something about what they sense and how they experience and what their tasks are as a caretaker for that particular place. And don't be offended if they don't tell you, because it may be something too sacred for them to talk about. That usually isn't the case, I've noticed, with liberal Catholic priests. They love to talk about their sacred space. So so your homework is to start gathering information about those things. And I think what'll happen is, when I start showing you some of the photographs that Marika took, you'll start realizing you had some of the same experiences or noticed some of the same things. And that's a good beginning point for understanding that these abilities are in all of us, even though most of us don't pay attention to them. So let's have some questions until it's time to close in about 25 minutes. Krista?
Could you please tell a bit about the obstacles to perceiving sacred spaces and how to overcome them? Because the places are there, but it's in a way our insensitivities or our own self-absorption with ourselves that we do not notice things. And also you were a bit talking about expectations, and now when we go out, what we could feel or see. So for instance, now that you have described it so well, and if we go there with our own preconceived idea or an expectation, then we might not experience in the same way, or, you know, because we have all these ideas and all these thoughts, how things.
The tricky thing is, I didn't show any of Marika's pictures. So the advantage is you may feel something around a particular place. And then if everybody says they felt the same thing around that place, the community knowledge helps to reinforce the idea that not all of you were hallucinating. But you also have to play with this a little bit. The main obstacle is we go too fast. You know, we have to slow down and we have to notice. And in a sense, the noticing is the beginning of the opening of the inner senses to have these experiences. And if it feels too overwhelming or scary or unsafe to do it in a sacred place, because some people may not feel attuned to the particular values of that place, do it with a tree. And the very simple meditation is to look at a tree and then to realize that the form of the tree is the way that the tree thinks, that its relationship to its crown and its trunk and its roots are embodied in every movement of its branches, which is a dance. And so if you sit there waiting for the tree to show itself to you as a dancer, that may not happen. But the gateway is to realize that you are perceiving the thoughts of a tree over a much, much longer period of time than a human life in many cases. I guess the banyan tree is nearly 500 years old. Something happens to consciousness when you're in the presence of things like that. It starts to lose some of its, it starts to slow down and lose some of its hard edges, and it becomes open to awe and reverence and gratitude. And then it's possible to start feeling something, some kind of interchange back and forth. So the real obstacle is fear, always. It's not easy for us to be in the presence of another human being, you know, although we can practice by thinking to ourselves, I see the divine in you whenever we come up to someone and see them. But we have likes and dislikes. And really just to be present in the now moment without concern for the past, without concern for the future, without being caught up in anything having to do with the body, a state of meditation, that can always be helpful. And sacred places will often invite you to sit down and be present there and slow down and observe and allow. So probably the biggest obstacle is that we don't allow. So there was a question from behind. I didn't get introduced. May I ask who you are? Ah, thank you. Okay. I thought this was true, but I haven't met you in person, so I wasn't sure. Thank you.
My question is very interesting, your presentation. When you talk about when we enter a place and we feel the energy of this place.
Can I ask if it's possible for you to come closer to the microphone? Because I'm having trouble hearing.
Okay. Here I am. Well,
Much better, thank you.
Thank you. I was saying that very interesting, your explanation, very interesting. My question is, when you enter a place and you feel the energy of this place, you said that most probably there are devas that carry this energy. What is the relationship of us and the deva? They help us, giving us the sense of peace. Do we help them also? How does that come back and forth?
The answer to your question is unity consciousness. Human beings are too caught up, obviously, in identity and individuality. And the devas have a group consciousness that can be individualized to some extent, but they don't have free will in the same way that human beings do. They are, as I mentioned, manifestations of the laws of God or the source. So ideally, we learn from each other. They learn something about creativity, because while they create things, they don't have the power of generating things, new things. That's something that is uniquely human. At the same time, we learn something about unity consciousness from working with them, working with spiritual energy. So a very, very specific way to answer your question is devas and nature spirits, the whole deva evolution, they don't extend their conscious being all the way to the physical plane. There's an upper level of the physical plane that's less physical, that's sometimes called the etheric level of being. It's not quite the astral level. That's as far down as they come. So if I were a human being and I wanted to create a sacred space, and I wanted to do it in my home, the first thing I would need to do is help the devas see that space. So what happens is anything I deeply love, anything I deeply reverence, that I could put, for example, in a special place where it won't be disturbed and see often and think about often, it starts to show up on this higher level of being as, I'll call it a birdhouse. It's like a little empty birdhouse. And then the deva sees that and comes into it. And as a result of coming into it, there's a link now that's been created between physical and non-physical reality. and energy can go both ways in that link. The sacredness of a sacred space usually requires the purification of the space. So sometimes the first being that comes is a being that cleans the energy of the space. And to the extent that the human beings are grateful for that, that deva is fed and nurtured by the gratitude. There's never, ever been a need for any kind of sacrifice, although all the world's religions and folklores have talked about that. The idea is, well, primitively speaking, can I be selfless enough to give up something important to me to the other world? You know, of course, if I'm doing it wanting a benefit of some kind, there's still some selfishness involved. If I don't believe that there's an other world, I might have to act it out with a sacrificial being, you know. But what the devas can take is the gratitude. If you're grateful for what you have, if you are not necessarily bringing a prayer to it, but just loving the deva, loving the fact that it exists. It comes, it does its job, it purifies things. And in the atmosphere, in that sacred atmosphere, things seem to last longer than they do other places. So for example, we usually know most of us know somebody who loves their car. They take their car and they give it a bath. They clean it out very, very often. Sometimes they give it a name. Devas can see those cars and they can come into the car, and the car can last 10 or 15 years longer than it would normally as a result. So this happens everywhere all the time with everybody, and we don't see it. So the deva gets employment. That's important. And it gets gratitude. That's important to it. The human gets the benefit of the energy of the deva, but also the learning that comes from the collaboration, if the collaboration is conscious or can be developed along those lines. Your question can be taken very much deeper than that. So let's revisit it a couple of times as the class, if you're able to continue coming, as the class develops.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you. Here's another question.
Since
Yep.
Am I audible?
I think it would be helpful if you were to come up front. Everybody here speaks very well, but when you're too far away, everybody's accent is wah, wah, wah. You don't understand anything.
Since you told about Deva, all about this description about the Deva, unless until it is, how do you describe Deva by, like, if it is non-physical, how did you come to a conclusion that Deva should be in this specifications and all this about the whole PowerPoint? But interestingly, whatever you have told, I have experienced it. So I could put my ideas into words, which through PowerPoint, what you have displayed us to us. But since I have, because I had an ideas, I don't know how to put in words. But the moment the PowerPoint, what you projected, everything I could connect with my past experience. That was really a wonderful experience, what I felt with the whole presentation. My question is, let's see, I have experienced this, so I could able to connect with this PowerPoint. What if I have not done? How could I had the the benefit of doubt would comes to a different level? So after experiencing all this point, what a difference between hallucination? Let's say that I have my loved one, if they're not next to me, and I feel the presence around me by connecting with all this PowerPoints descriptions, what you have told us. So how should I distinguish between these both? Let us assume that all this exists itself. Because in my experience, if I see that many people comes with an understanding that they have some people next to them, But how could I tell them that this world exists, and how should I make a distinction between, yes, hallucination and this process?
You know, the beginning for me was what I call a provisional belief. That's a belief that I haven't absolutely accepted, but I'm going to live as if it were true for the time being. And if there are benefits to my life from living as if it were true, then I'll consider adopting it as a belief of my own. So sometimes when I'm talking to people who don't understand such things, I might say, well, it could be a provisional belief. If it goes against your belief system, it would be too hard to root out your training, whatever it happens to be, cultural training and learning from schools. But if you want to live as if this were true, just notice things. And eventually you may get fairly strong indications that what you're perceiving is true and accurate as opposed to a hallucination. Now, if you yourself are convinced, the best thing to do is to find people that you can talk to these things about where you don't have to do the explanation of the whole system. And maybe the beginning of creating a community like that is the group that you're in now. So make some strong connections to have some conversations about these things. The willingness to share our inner experience is what creates strong, deep relationships and communities. And especially for unusual experiences and spiritual experiences, it's important to have that sense of community because it creates safety with other people. As far as hallucinations are concerned, my belief is, no, my attitude, I guess you could call this a kind of methodology. Everything has validity, but I may not yet know what reality it has that validity in. So somebody saw something. All I can say is that it's valid because they saw it. But I may not know what reality it had its validity in. It could have been imaginary. It could have been the result of a drug. It could have been a spiritual being. It could have been a different spiritual being than the one they thought it was. All those questions have to remain open until the individual develops enough spiritual understanding and awareness to ask the right questions and draw out some answers, either from inside themselves or from books or from finding knowledgeable people to ask questions of. Did that help with your question?
Yes, please. Partially, I'm figuring out myself.
What about yourself?
Partially.
Okay. Well, you can come back to it. So let's take one more question before we close, the one from the upper corner.
So was there before? No.
Yeah.
Leo. I think Aditya has a question.
I have two questions. So you spoke about perceiving in three ways: consciousness, image or form, or energy. So how does one enhance the ability to see? So is there any practice that you personally do which helps you develop this more? And the second question is about sacred spaces geometry that you talked about. So is there anything in particular about certain shapes that you have noticed which is able to say trap the energy better or something like that, which makes say temples slightly better than a normal space which would not have such a structure? And an example for that could be a pyramid, because I've heard that's a structure that holds energy better.
So I think the best way to answer the question is in a more abstract, theoretical way, as opposed to talking about specific shapes. So I'm working on your second question. Some shapes seem to have the power of accumulation, and some shapes seem to have the power of distribution. So I noticed in the photographs that Marika made, there are examples of sacred geometry that do both. So my specific assignment to you and anyone else who wants to try it is notice those areas where sacred geometry is present and see if you can sense, remember what I said about thought having a direction. See if you can sense whether the radiation of energy is being accumulated or whether it's being distributed. Or it could go both ways, or it could be unclear. There may be some places where no energy is moving at all. I saw a couple places that looked stagnant in the photographs. So as far as enhancing the ability is, I think the best way for me to do that is to start tomorrow's talk there, because that's more properly where the techniques should come in. And I'll have to tell some personal stories about how I developed these abilities myself. So as far as particular shapes are concerned, human beings have had hundreds of thousands of years to experiment, and there are traditions about these things. And some of the knowledge probably has been lost, some of it has been carried forward, but it's always there to be rediscovered. For me, I'm only ever really interested in whether the energy is accumulating or being distributed. And so I don't go deeper than that, but I imagine there are many other ways in which that can show up, and other ways energy can move. Any other questions, or shall we end? Yeah. Okay.
Actually, the two questions are like, suppose I get some energy, or when I go to a temple, I feel good in a sacred place. So can I carry them with the same quality or the power to a home? And how can I maintain it? That is one of my questions. And the
Let me answer that question first. And we might have to wait for the answer to the second one for tomorrow, because I understand that you need to end pretty soon. So when people go on pilgrimages, often they bring something home with them from the place that they go to. And sometimes these things are provided at the temple itself. Water from the temple that has been blessed, or a stone or an object, or sometimes you're able to bring something and that can be blessed while it's there. I believe that this is a true thing that can happen. A friend of mine recently went to a temple in a foreign country and brought back a tiny little statue, and something of the place that place came from was in it, and it also picked up others' energies along the way. So I think that the whole basis of the idea of going on pilgrimage and bringing something home is to create a connection between you and the devas of the temple that you've been to. And if that thing that you bring home is a part of any kind of sacred space that you've created for yourself, like an altar, it can help, it can support you. But we can go into more detail about that later. It's a good question.